Good morning, everyone, and Shavua Tov, good week from Chabad of Rechavia and Nachlaot, right here in Yerushalayim. We are now live at our daily Tanya class, right, 9:30 to 10 o'clock. In English, and we look forward, Bezrat Hashem, to being able to learn with as many people as possible. This has been wonderful this past week and inspirational for me, and Bezrat Hashem should be able to continue in a healthy way with as many people as possible. One of the insane ideas of the coronavirus is how quickly it spreads. That apparently one person can infect 3 people, and very quickly each one of these people can multiply and to infect many more people. If you just do the simple math of times 3, how quickly we can get to very, very large numbers. And that's part of the scary part of this threatening virus, that we want to keep down the level of how quickly people infect their surroundings. It's like the famous story, the metaphor that was told also recently by Minister Rabbi Yaakov Litzman, that a person once saved the king, and the king said, "How can I repay you?" And the person said, "Just take a chess game and start with the first box, and you give me 3 rubles or $3 or 3 cents even, and every day double it times that amount." And within a very short amount of time, the king was unable to keep up to the payment to this individual. We are taught that in Ruchaniyut, in spirituality, you have the same thing of the way it is in the material world, but many times more. So if there can be such threatening destruction and illness in this world, how much more so when it comes to, in a positive sense, to be able to affect another person and to multiply that so quickly and so many by very large numbers, how much more so that we're able to have a positive effect in the world so quickly and in such great numbers. This leads us into the new chapter that we're going to learn this week in the first portion of Tanya. And this is chapter 32, which in Hebrew is Lamed Bet. The numerical value of Lamed is 30, and Bet is 2. That's 32. And if you look at the Tanya, starting from the beginning of Likutei Amarim, there's a sequence of explanations in the chapters beginning from Aleph all the way till the end, chapter Nun Gimel 53. But if you pay attention when you're learning the Tanya, that chapter 32 seems to not fit in exactly to the sequence of events from the first chapter leading into the next chapter. There is a little connection, of course, but what the Alter Rebbe discusses in chapter 32 is regarding the subject of Ahavat Yisrael. In the previous chapter, in chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe discussed the concept of being sad about one's situation in service of Hashem, in the spiritual state, and how can a person actually be happy? By realizing that the neshama is sort of in captivity in the body. So the negativity that a person experiences is not from the soul, it's not from the neshama. It's really from the external, mundane, and other ideas which come into the person's life, but it's not really part of the neshama per se. And so we're going to open up the Tanya. It should also be on our Facebook page of Chabad of Rechavia. This time we uploaded the 32nd chapter from the book Lessons in Tanya. You can look at it from a regular text in the Hebrew, or in volume 1, right towards the end of the Sefer, you'll see chapter 32. I also have in front of me the Tanya, the regular Tanya, but for us this is special. This Tanya was printed over here in Rechavia. You might see at the back of every Tanya, you have prints. We're around 6,500 times that Tanya has been printed. And the Rebbe requested in the early 80s that every single city, every single neighborhood that has Jews in the world should print the Tanya. And the letters, the words of the Tanya are holy. The words of the Tanya purify the world. And therefore, just by the mere fact that the Tanya is printed in a certain neighborhood, in a certain area, that already brings bracha. Like there are several amazing stories that in the Lebanon War, the first Lebanon War in 1982, how the Chabadniks went into Lebanon and into the war zone with their mitzvah tanks, and to print and printers, and to be able to print the Tanya. They printed the entire Tanya. And this, I heard this from soldiers that were soldiers at the time, and people said that this brought them a lot of bracha and siyata d'shmaya, help from Hashem in their own fighting for Eretz Yisrael. And so we had the zechus to print this Tanya. Yes, this very Tanya was printed exactly 8 years ago, 6 years ago, on the Alter Rebbe's 200th yard site on Chaf Dalet Tevet. So it's very special that we have this Tanya over here, and to be able to learn from the Tanya, we printed several hundred copies of the Tanya. So let's go to the Tanya Perek Lamed Bet. And even before we start, I want to mention something interesting about the number of the chapter. The number of the chapter is Lev. Lamed Bet is Lev. Lev means heart. So you might be able to say that this chapter is the heart of the Tanya. This chapter really takes gives us the etzem, gives us the essence of the neshama of who we are. The Rebbe says this in one of his Hasidic discourses. Now, if you look at the second chapter of the Tanya, you'll see that the Alter Rebbe talks about how precious every neshama is, and that every neshama is part of Hashem. Hashem is considered our father, quote unquote, and we are part of Hashem, just like a child is intrinsically a part of the parent. And so the fact that this chapter is going to discuss in great depth the subject of the greatest mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your fellow Jew as yourself. So this really is the heart of the Tanya. When we learn the Tanya, we feel inspired. We feel that we're learning about who we are, our neshama, our being. And so the more we understand who we are, the better we'll be able to understand the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Because if you think about the mitzvah, it's a very difficult mitzvah to observe. Because the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow Jew as yourself, how is that possible? How is it possible to love another person kamocha, just like yourself? You know, just in life, Hashem created us in a way that we love ourselves in our essence. We can always protect ourselves. If a person, God forbid, falls, you naturally, a person naturally has, you protect yourself, you put your knee or your elbow there, and you fall and you protect If a person needs to find an excuse of why a person did something wrong for yourself, you can always find an excuse and to legitimize why a person did something for themselves. I'm not sure if it's going to work in the courtroom, but for a person's own self, you can always find excuses, because that's how Hashem created us. And here we're expected to love a fellow Jew, kamocha, just as yourself. Even when it comes to people who are close to us, whether it's family or dear friends, a person always loves themselves more than other people. It's just a nature. Another example is a child, a baby, a young child. A young child naturally keeps things for themselves. We have to educate them. We have to train them to share. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just the way Hashem created us, that we naturally take care of ourselves. So how can we be expected all of a sudden to change gears and to love another Jew kamocha, just as yourself? The answer to this question is going to be quite long, because it's at least an entire chapter of Tanya. Hopefully we'll go through this chapter throughout the course of this week. And it's probably easier said than done, but the fact still remains a fact. We have a goal. We have a purpose. Our goal is to try to bring ourselves to love every single Jew kamocha, just as we love ourselves. And I can tell you one thing, that the more we learn Chassidut, the more we learn about what a Jew is made up of, the more we learn about who we are, we will realize hopefully, that another Jew is part of us. And therefore, it's possible, albeit difficult, but it's possible for us to love every single Jew kamocha, just as ourselves. So let's start in the text of the chapter 32. Perak Lamed Bet. V'hinei, and behold, al yedei kiyum hadvarim hanal hanizkarim la'el, through the fact that a person fulfills the words that have been discussed earlier in chapter 31. In chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe discussed, as we said just a few minutes ago, how a person can bring to themselves simcha and joy through the fact that a person realizes that the neshama is the real me. The body, the materialism around the world is not the real me. True, the materialism of the world may bring a person down, may bring their spiritual level to a low, but the fact itself that we have a neshama, that itself should be comforting to us, and we should realize that really this is the real me, and therefore that should bring us simcha. Liot gufo nivzeh v'nim'as beinav, that a person's body, to view one's body with to view a person's body with scorn and contempt, and to find joy in the joy of the soul alone. Harei zu derech yeshara v'kala. This is a straight and easy way. Lavo lidei kiyum mitzvat v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to bring oneself to observe the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your fellow Jew as yourself. L'chol nefesh miYisrael, for every single Jew, l'migadol v'ad katan, from the greatest to the smallest, so to speak. So once we realize the importance of the neshama, of the soul, this will help us understand better this special mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your fellow Jew as yourself. One interesting point to bear in mind, if you look at the verse in Parashat Kedoshim, this week, today, this morning, we're starting the new Chumash of Chumash Vayikra. And in this Chumash, just about 6 or 7 parshas away, we're going to read the parsha of Kedoshim. And in Kedoshim, the Torah says, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Hashem. I am God. So the famous question is, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, what does that have to do with ani Hashem? Ani Hashem are mitzvahs between man and God. But V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your fellow Jew as yourself, is between man and man. So why should Hashem say over here, unlike in most other mitzvot, all of a sudden over here Hashem says, Ani Hashem, I am God. And the metaphor is brought in our sages. That there was once a king, and the king heard that someone in his kingdom did something offensive to the royal family, and he called everyone together, and he was going to hang this individual in front of the entire crowd. And they made a day. Everyone came together, and the king was sitting there on the dais, and the person comes up, and all of a sudden someone comes up running from the crowd and says, Your Majesty, it wasn't him, it was me. And so the person says, No, it was me. And so the person that ran up from the crowd, he said, No, it was going back and forth. And the king brings both people together. And he says, It's unbelievable. It's so remarkable, the appreciation, the love that you have for each other, that you're willing to die, and that the other person should remain alive. I'm not going to kill either of you. I want to be the third person involved in your friendship. Your friendship is so deep that you're willing to die for each other. I want to be part of your friendship. And this is what Hashem says. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. If you can bring yourselves to love each other, kamocha, just as yourselves, Ani Hashem. I, Hashem, want to be part of this friendship. This is so special, so meaningful to me, that I want to be part of it. And so, we're going to learn the importance of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that when we really, truly realize how it's possible to love each and every Jew kamocha, like yourself, like ourselves, then that is the ultimate. That is the goal of where we're supposed to aspire to. Now let's continue. Ki for me'achar shagufo nim'as umetuav etzlo, since a person's body is disgusted by himself, v'hanefesh v'haruach, and the soul and the spirit. Mi yodea gedulatan uma'alatan b'shorshan u'mekoran belokim chayim. Who knows the greatness and the specialty of the souls in their sources in Hashem? The source of every neshama is so high. B'shagam shekulan matimot. For all of the souls are equal. V'av echad lekulana, and there's one Father for all. V'lachein nikro kol Yisrael achim mamish, and therefore all of Am Yisrael are considered brothers. Mitzad shoresh nafsham ba'Hashem echad. When we look at the source of their soul in Hashem, rak sha'agufim mechulakim. The only technical thing is that their bodies are separated. Let's try to understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. You know, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, states a similar concept. He says that when we have Ahavat Yisrael, we need to have Ahavat Yisrael like one body. Koma Shlema. in Am Yisrael, just like you have in every individual body, you have a head, you have the eyes, you have a body, the arms, you have the legs, the toes, the toenails. Which part would you say is the highest? The highest is the mind, intellect. That is the most elite level of a person. What's the lowest? Not only is it the feet and the toes, which is the lowest part of the body, that if you cut the nail, you don't even feel pain. Which means that a person, that within one body there are higher levels and lower levels. So the Talmud Yerushalmi says, let's view Am Yisrael as koma achat shlema, one complete unit. There are some of us that are on the level of the head. There are some of us that are on the level of the body, of the heart. There are some of us that are on the level of the toe, and even of the toenail. What does it mean, a toenail? That a person can be on such a low spiritual level that he might feel as if he could be, God forbid, disconnected from the source. It's not possible, but a person can feel that way. So maybe what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is that we should view ourselves that we can have Ahavat Yisrael when we look at ourselves as we are all brothers. We are all part of one body. We come from the same parent, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from Hashem. And we come down here, we are each on a different level. But if you pay attention to the words of the Alter Rebbe that we just learned, we'll realize that the Alter Rebbe is talking about a much deeper level of Ahavat Yisrael than that of the Talmud Yerushalmi. Because over here the Alter Rebbe says, not only to look at each other, at ourselves, as being one part of a greater unit, rather to look at ourselves mitzad shoresh nafsham. When we look at a person as far as the source of our souls, wow, that's very, very deep. That's a very, very high level. Because if you look at the source, then you can't even tell any difference between them. For example, when a child is being created and a child is born, the child, the Alter Rebbe says in the Tanya, in the 2nd chapter, that a child comes from the mind of the parents. Well, in the mind, the semen which comes from the mind of the parent, can you tell there the difference between the head and the body and the arms and the legs? No. You cannot tell the difference because it's all one. Can you tell in the parents Baruch Hashem have several children? Can you tell before the parents have children? Can you tell in their mind? Because children come from the mind. Can you tell the difference? Can you separate between the children? Can you separate between the individual details of the body of the children? Obviously no. Obviously not. We cannot. And therefore, that's how we have to view each other, and that's how we have to view ourselves. The way we are all included in our source, B'Hashem Echad, in the one God. The way all of our souls, the common denominator, that which unifies all of us, the way we are in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the source, nothing in the world can separate us. There's no way for us to see any difference. If you view Am Yisrael as being one body, which is true, it's nice, but that's not the ultimate level of unity. Because at least then, you can see the different levels of Am Yisrael. Some of us are greater, some of us are more simple, some of us are more active, some of us are more into learning. There are different levels, different types, and it's perfectly okay. That's how Hashem created us. That's how Hashem created human beings. That's how Hashem created Am Yisrael. That no two people are alike, just like no two people look alike. But nevertheless, it's a lower level of viewing the relationship and the connection between us. Because at the end of the day, There are different levels. But if you put on the lenses of the Alter Rebbe, and you see what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that we're able to see, to view another Jew the way we are in our source, where over there it's impossible to differentiate between one Jew and another, so then it's obviously possible to love another Jew kamocha, kamocha, just as yourself. Just as you love yourself, you love the other person, because there's absolutely no difference between the two. Now obviously it's very, very easy to say this, but perhaps very difficult to observe and to practice. But hopefully throughout the remainder of this chapter, Perek Lamed Bet, we'll be able to understand a little better how that's possible, to be able to have true Ahavat Yisrael, how it's possible to view another Jew just like myself. You see, we are human beings, and so a human being can only see what you see at the surface. We don't have this laser beam that can see deep down into a person what they really feel. So if person A offends or hurts person B, God forbid, then really what's happening is that the person B sees what A did. So how do you expect B to love A just as he did before the person offended him? Because we're human beings, we see, our eyes see what we see, and therefore it's hard for us to see deeper and to be able to appreciate a person based on they are as far as their neshama is concerned, and not necessarily what we see in their actions. And so therefore, we have to learn. When we learn Torah, when we learn Chassidus, this brings the facts to the surface. And it hopefully brings us at least a little bit closer to be able to relate to the truth and to the pnimiyut, to the innermost way of understanding things, the innermost way of viewing our surroundings and people that we encounter. And hopefully we'll be able, B'ezrat Hashem, to appreciate people for who they are and not necessarily for what they do. And when we learn the Torah, when we learn the Tanya, we realize, V'lachein nikro kol Yisrael achim mamish. And therefore, Am Yisrael is called purely brothers, mitzad shoresh nafsham ba'Hashem echad. When we look at each other as we are from in our source, in one God. Just want to finish off with one point, this lesson. That on one hand, we mentioned earlier that a person has a disgust for his body, because he realizes that his body is not the ultimate. It's the neshama which is the ultimate. I just want to mention what it says in other places in Chassidut, that this is a starting place. We start with magnifying the neshama, with magnifying a person's soul, and putting the body to the side, realizing that the main thing is the neshama. But we have to remember at the same time that Hashem created the body as well. And on some level, the body is there not to disturb us, not to distract us, rather to help out. And so, after we've already established that the neshama is the real me, and the real individual of who we are, then we're able to go to step number 2. And we're able to say, you know what, body, you're created by Hashem. And perhaps you're equally as important, in one sense, even more important than the neshama. You might even have a higher source than the neshama, as we can explain another time, B'ezrat Hashem. And so therefore, the fact that you're here is in order to embrace you. And when the body is part of us, and the body also helps us do Hashem's will, then we're able to accomplish much, much more. Because after all, we're not supposed to negate the materialism of our world. We're not supposed to negate our bodies. We're not supposed to throw away the physical surroundings and only focus on Hashem. Hashem wants us also to embrace the world and to elevate the world. And when you see a person, you see a friend that's in need, we need to help that person. Not only help them put on tefillin and do mitzvahs and give tzedakah and light Shabbat candles, but we also have to help a person in their material needs. If a person needs help, we have to reach out to them. And that's also a major part in Ahavat Yisrael. It was very important for me that I share with you this point, that about the balance between the neshama and the body. Shalom, shalom to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us, whether live or reading or watching this class later on today. I look forward to continuing Bezrat Hashem tomorrow morning, 9:30, same time, same place, Bezrat Hashem. All the best. Shalom.